Okay, so we felt that, you'll hear a lot about the richness of the area that we're going to be talking about tonight, the Great Bear Rainforest. We thought we'd, have a bit of a slide presentation and have the images going as we proceed over the course of the evening. Just a little bit in terms of housekeeping then. So if you can please mute your mobile phones. You don't actually have to turn them off because we're going to ask you to engage them if you have the Twitter application a little later, because we're going to do something called a tweet thundercloud. So please just have them on mute. There will be no intermission as well, so please take washroom breaks as you need them. We will be videotaping the event this evening to create clips that we will put online on our various social media channels. And there will also be photographers kind of wandering around and whatnot this evening as well. And if you haven't done so already, please pick up a copy of the Great Bear Rainforest handout that we were providing at the doorway. If you don't have one now, perhaps on your way out, if you could pick one up, that would be great. Because in there we'll convey more of the information that you're going to hear about this evening. So in terms of the program, I wanted to say, first of all, on behalf of our three organizations that have brought us all together this evening, Forest Ethics Solutions, Greenpeace, and the Sierra Club BC, we'd like to welcome you to a very special evening of storytelling, of inspiration, as we share with you the magic and mystery of the Great Bear Rainforest. And we also want to update you as well on the conservation agreements that have developed over the past decade or so that have aimed to provide for a healthy forest and healthy communities, both human and non-human alike. Just curious, how many of you have been to the Great Bear Rainforest? Show your hands. I can't see. Oh, good. Okay. That's pretty good. Maybe a third or so of everyone here this evening. That's wonderful. So essentially, in terms of the evening then, what we want to do is, I'll give you a bit of an overview of the Great Bear Rainforest, the story of it, the journey that has taken the region's First Nations, the BC government, or various governments, our organizations and industry, that the journey that we've taken in moving from conflict to collaboration to implementation of these agreements. My colleagues Valerie Langer from Forest Ethics Solutions and Jens Wieting of the Sierra Club BC will then engage you in a little fun game of Great Bear Trivia. We're then going to have Doug Nieslas as well, who is from the Kitasoo First Nations territory at the center of the heart of the Great Bear Rainforest. He's a spirit bear guide and a resource manager for his nation, and an amazing photographer, so he's going to present some of his amazing photos of the region that he works in and that he calls home. And Doug will also provide his perspective as well on how the agreements have been, what they've meant to his community, and where the challenges have been. Valerie will then rejoin us to talk to us more about the challenges ahead as we get to the finish line to wrap up the important work that we've been engaged in for, frankly, about 2 decades or so. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to have a tweet or a Twitter thunderclap for those of you with Twitter to participate in tonight. We'll wrap up with a question and answer, and also essentially what you can do to help us achieve the success in the region that we also passionately wish for and want. And we should be wrapped up by about 9 o'clock or so. Sound good? Yeah? All right. Great. So the Great Bear Rainforest, it is one, as you can see by the photos as well, if you haven't visited yet, is one profoundly special place. As British Columbians, we are very blessed to have this unique, magical place so close to home. It forms an essential part of the Earth's natural heritage, especially since it represents 1/4 of the world's remaining coastal temperate rainforests. And that is very, very significant, especially in a changing world in terms of climate change. It stretches along the mainland coast of British Columbia, so if you can imagine pretty well where Campbell River is on Vancouver Island, but if you sort of shoot across over to the mainland, from that point up to the Alaska border, that is the Great Bear Rainforest pretty well. It's home to an incredible richness of biodiversity, with towering stands of ancient cedars, packs of unique coastal wolves, herds of elk, and mountain goats who scale rock cliffs, significant populations of eagles and whales, and it's also home to the rare marble murrelet and northern goshawk as well. And of course, there are the 5 species of Pacific salmon that close this intricate link between the forests and the ocean of the Great Bear Rainforest. In fact, the waters around the Great Bear Rainforest have now come to be known also as the Great Bear Sea. And also, given the name itself, it's actually been named for the vast numbers of grizzly bears, black bears, and the rare spirit bear as well. And those are the rare white bears that are found nowhere else on the planet. So, as important as the natural heritage of the region is, the cultural heritage is just as important, because it makes up the traditional territories, the unceded territories of dozens of First Nations. Some of the settlements in the area, such as the Heiltsuk First Nations Namu settlement at the heart of the Great Bear, also go back 12,000 years. So just think of it, 12,000 years. That predates, or that's very close to the time of the Ice Age as well. So yeah, it's special. It's special, and it's why when it was threatened with unsustainable industrial scale logging in the 1990s, many people, both First Nations and non-First Nations alike, fought long and hard to protect it. And it could very well be that there are some of you here this evening that may have been at some of those protests, or possibly even doing solidarity protests here in Vancouver to be part of the whole movement, the whole sort of upswelling that was taking place in the 1990s that came to be characterized as the War in the Woods, or one of a number of wars in the woods at the time. And so throughout these early conflicts, beginning in 1994 at Easta, Orfog Creek, and Nuhawk and Heiltsuk territories, and then spreading out, First Nations hereditary leadership and the many of the elected leadership, also those communities, and their grassroots community members worked closely with environmental groups and courageous concerned citizens to protect the region. And many went to jail, and so the controversy escalated. And so the Great Bear Rainforest reached unprecedented levels of media coverage internationally, given all the controversy that was going on. Environmental groups worked to have multi-million-dollar contracts torn up. That was for the wood and paper sales. First Nations moved through with their legal rights cases forward to make decisions over their territories. So there was a lot bubbling up, a lot of controversy and uncertainty for investors and customers, because the companies that were logging terribly were not listening to us. They weren't listening to First Nations, they weren't listening to the public. And frankly, neither was the BC government of the day. So a lot of controversy, and eventually we reached the point of getting to the table, of getting all of us, the companies and environmental groups at one table, First Nations and government, because they are the legitimate sort of decision makers. We were the stakeholders as environmental groups and industry. These tables started to form and to look for ways to resolve the controversies. And the controversies themselves actually make up the early part of the campaign itself. The campaign has been going for, as I mentioned, about 2 decades or so. But the majority of that time has been in a solutions-making and negotiations sort of phase. The majority of the time has been spent that way. But since 2000, there have been a number of major milestones along the way or so. So in 2000, you had major alliances of the parties that were sort of forming. So the environmental groups, the ones that are here tonight and having organized this event, came together as one coalition. Industry came together also as another coalition. Both parties then came together as a joint solutions project, and we've been working towards solutions ever since. First Nations also coalesced into a number of alliances, Nanokolas Council in the southern part of the Great Bear Rainforest, and Coastal First Nations Great Bear Initiative in the central and north coast. So you had these alliances that were forming that made it much more efficient and frankly needed as a way of negotiating and bringing the interests forward to try and get us to solutions. And essentially, what emerged from that whole process, there was a coalescing of various planning tables, the outcomes of those planning tables, independent science. There was a panel that was struck as well that recommended a number of solutions in moving forward for how you can have a healthy rainforest and healthy communities at the same time. And so a number of goals were set under a new logging regime called ecosystem-based management that sought to look at protecting 70% of old-growth forests across the entire region, while also calling for high levels of human well-being in the communities. And so what was really unique about this approach was that it wasn't about pitting the economy versus ecology, as sort of the Western capitalist system tends to do. It's like you have to choose one or the other. It's about having both together, but sort of encouraging different forms of economic activity on the land base, while protecting enough of it for ecological integrity. And this was the promise and the hope of the Great Bear Rainforest Agreements that were ultimately announced in 2006 by then Premier Gordon Campbell. And the major, some of the highlights of the agreements included a third of the Great Bear Rainforest being set aside from logging, with a commitment to getting to 70%. And as importantly, there was also a commitment towards revenue sharing and shared decision-making with the region's First Nations governments over resource management issues affecting their territory. So it was a really, really big deal. When the agreements were announced in 2006, the idea was to wrap up in 3 years by 2009. However, by 2009, all parties realized that we weren't going to get there. First Nations weren't ready, the province was ready, industry wasn't ready. So we agreed to another 5 years of further work of implementing the agreements and coming up with a plan for how we can get to 70% protection while at the same time enabling what's the word I'm looking for, a forest industry that would be viable as well. So those were really critical factors in this. So I'm happy to say that after years of negotiations or so, that earlier this year we did reach a set of recommendations as the Joint Solutions Project that has allowed us to come very close to achieving those goals. The recommendations are now before First Nations and the province, and have been so for the last 9 months to deliberate over. So we're very, very close to attaining the kind of protection needed for the Great Bear Rainforest. And it's really, really, really exciting. Nothing else like this exists on this scale in the world. And in recent years, we've been approached by academic institutions, provincial and territorial governments, and other Indigenous organizations to understand how it is we've been able to achieve what we have been. How we've been able to make this progress in a multilateral sort of complex set of land use decisions and tables that involve not only diverse visions for stewarding the land, but also have meaningfully accounted for First Nations rights and title concerns as well. So it's a model that we're proud of and can truly tout to the world. In fact, I was just in Spain a few weeks ago with over 100 forest campaigners from around the world, and many have been tracking what we've been doing here over the years. They've been interested. A number of them have been involved in implementing their own agreements, whether it's the soil moratorium in Brazil or getting to zero deforestation in Indonesia. Many have been inspired by the work that we have done here and continue to do, and they are watching to see how things sort of unfold in the coming months now as we try and get to the final finish line. And then most recently as well, a few days ago perhaps, some of you may have seen the CBC News piece that reported that the Great Bear Rainforest Agreements as one of 6 solutions that actually sort of go against a quote-unquote planet in decline. That was a report by the World Wildlife Fund that indicated how bad things are, and things are bad. But you have models like this that show a lot of promise that things could turn around and change other parts of the world. So it's a very exciting time to feel how close we are to realizing this compelling vision that the conservation agreements convey, and we want to share that tonight. But we also want to share as well with you that there are some significant roadblocks along the way to the finishing line and finalizing our collective work. And my colleagues will get into that a little bit later. But first, let's have a little bit of fun. My colleagues Valerie and Jens, if I can ask you to come up here. We're going to sort of engage you in a little game called the Great Bear Untrivia Trivia game. So, you guys want to take it away?
Sure.